We're learning about Chanuka versus Shabbos. We're learning about the concept of the Shabbos candles, the Chanuka candles, the comparison between the two of them. And we are learning about why it is that the Rambam, Dafka, speaks about the laws of Shabbos candles versus Chanuka candles in the context of Chanuka rather than in the context of Shabbos. Okay, so those were all of the things that we raised. And we said there are many elements of this story that don't seem to make sense. How come it is that he brought all of these proofs to indicate to us how important peace is, the idea of the soita, the quotation that the entire purpose of giving Torah was only to bring shalom, to bring peace into the world, all of these different factors. So we explored all of them, and we came to the following conclusions. We came to the conclusion, number one, that the nature of Shabbos, or more specifically of Shabbos candles, is in order to honor Shabbos and, so to speak, to have pleasure on Shabbos. That's basically a very big component of why we have Shabbos candles in the first place. That's what the Rambam wrote in the laws of Shabbos. Then, when it came to the laws of Chanuka, suddenly he brings up that the purpose of Shabbos candles is to bring shalom into the world, to bring peace into the world, or peace into the home, and by extension into the world. And basically what that means in practical terms is that nobody should bump into furniture if they're in the dark on a Friday night. So the question then was, if the main reason to have Shabbos candles is to honor Shabbos, how come it is that suddenly over there in the laws of Chanuka, he talks about peace? Right? And so effectively, what we've learned is that the Rambam wants to teach us about Judaism in general, that the nature of Judaism, the whole of Judaism, is to bring peace to the world. Why was the Torah given? To bring peace to the world. Why do we have Shabbos candles? To illustrate the theme of Judaism, not just to bring peace into your home, but to illustrate the theme of Judaism. Now, if we've got two mitzvahs, and the one mitzvah has its personal theme, Chanuka candles, got its personal theme. Remember the holiday of Chanuka, remember the miracles of Chanuka, and so on. And then I've got another mitzvah that also has its personal theme, which is to honor Shabbos. But in addition to that, it's got a larger theme, which is the theme of peace. Then the peace theme, now listen carefully to the words here, overrides the individual theme of the individual mitzvah. And we want to just adjust that detail. It's not that it overrides, as if to say, this mitzvah is more important, more valuable, or somehow trumps that mitzvah. Instead, this was the point that the Rambam wanted to illustrate to us. The entire goal of the whole of Torah is always to bring peace into the world. If we have a situation that there's Chanuka candles on the one hand and Shabbos candles on the other hand, and we need to do what the Torah is all about, i.e., bring peace to the world. And in this particular scenario, the way that we bring that peace or illustrate that peace or share that peace in the world is by suspending Chanuka candles. Well, then that means that at that particular point in time, how do you show peace in the world? How do you do what Judaism is all about? By not lighting the Chanuka candles. Get it? So in other words, it's not that the Chanuka candles get shafted because we need to bring peace to the world. It's that the Chanuka candles, by not being lit, they become the peace in the world. Okay, so let's have a look where we're up to in the Sicha. We're at Ois Hey. That's right over here. Do you see that? Ois Hey down at the bottom on the right-hand side. And we're going to explain the concept a little further. Remember also that the Rambam had told us that the concept of, or the language, I should say, that the Rambam chose to use, the Rambam used the word that Ner Shabbos is, or Ner Beiso, he says, the candles of your own home, which is the candles of Shabbos, are koidem. They come first, before the candles of Chanuka. He doesn't use the word like in the Gemara, adif, which means to say that it's more important. It just says it comes first. Why? Because the Rambam wants us to understand and to appreciate that the goal over here is to say whatever brings peace, that is what's most aligned with what Torah is all about. Let's have a look at Ois Hey. Because the Rambam now needs to explain this concept to us. The Rambam is making an argument which says that the whole of Torah, every single mitzvah, is all about bringing peace into the world. And this is illustrated in this particular story. So he has to prove that to us. So the Rambam has to illustrate to us that when the issue at hand is an issue of peace, is as nit beoifen as ein mitzvah ve'isser, veret nitche durch der adifus von a zweite mitzvah ve'isser. What does the Rambam want us to know? He wants us to understand that if the issue at hand is a question of peace, then it will never be a case of this mitzvah taking priority over that mitzvah. That's how we originally understood it. We originally thought that this was a question of priority. Which is the greater priority? Shabbos candles or Chanuka candles? The Rambam says, no, that's not what we're discussing over here. Instead, what we're discussing over here is which of the two of them will express the primary theme of Torah to bring peace into the world better. Now, das is matim euch mit dem Teichen von der zweiter mitzvah. So therefore, unlike if I was weighing up, does mitzvah A have more power or mitzvah B? In which case, one mitzvah would rise and the other mitzvah would be deferred. That's not what he wants to do over here. What he wants to do over here is he wants to say that it is possible to do something that celebrates one mitzvah without detracting from the other mitzvah. So in order to illustrate that point, is the Rambam mamshichu masbir. That's why the Rambam dafka goes into the detail of saying, Gadol hashalom shekol haTorah nitno lasoi shalom ba'olam. That peace is a great virtue of Judaism. In fact, it's the reason the whole Torah was given, only to introduce more peace into the world. Okay? Because we asked the question, why does the Rambam even say that? Surely this is just a question of Chanuka versus Shabbos. Why does he bring in this broad-based concept about the whole perspective that Judaism has on life? Why? For this reason. Because he wants us to appreciate and understand that we are not displacing the mitzvah of Shabbos, of Chanuka candles with the so-called greater mitzvah of Shabbos candles. Instead, we're trying to illustrate, this is a moment, an opportunity for us to illustrate what Judaism is all about. So let's see how he does that. V'bald as kol haTorah, jede mitzvah is inyan lasi shalom ba'olam. Seeing that the entire Torah and therefore every single mitzvah is intended to bring peace to the world, es verstandig, as beshas es kommt zu einer Mitzvah, was ist verbunden mit Shalom kipshutoi, kann man nicht sagen, als die Mitzvah, was peilt Shalom, ist doiche die zweite Mitzvah von der Mitzvah Torah oder der Rabbanan. What does the Rambam want us to understand? If the entire purpose of Torah is peace, I now have two mitzvahs. One of those mitzvahs carries the theme of peace in a very open way, and therefore it's going to today take precedence over the other mitzvah. Because its theme is peace, it doesn't in any way diminish the value of the other mitzvah. Weil, and this is what we've already discussed, weil durch den Kiem von der Mitzvah, was bringt Shalom befeuert, wird ausgeführt euch die Kavonas an der Sinne v'atzivim von der zweiten Mitzvah, lasse Shalom. Because what's happening over here is, effectively, you've got a situation where the mitzvah we are choosing to do shares the theme of the mitzvah we are choosing not to do. Or to put it into simple English, why do you do a mitzvah? Any mitzvah at all. Why? To bring shalom, peace to the world. If this particular mitzvah is overtly for shalom, then that's great. That means that by doing this mitzvah, I actually illustrate what the purpose was of the mitzvah I'm not doing. Get it? Why should I light Chanuka candles? To bring peace into the world. Okay? So why am I not lighting Chanuka candles at this particular time where I've got the toss-up between Chanuka and Shabbos. So why am I not lighting Shabbos candles this particular time? Why? Because I want to bring peace into the world. Okay, so there's no contradiction. The reason to light Chanuka candles is to bring peace. And in this case, the reason not to light Chanuka candles is to bring peace. So it's as good as if I lit the Chanuka candles. And with that, we can understand another question that we asked. Because we were a little bit perturbed. We said, look, we can understand that the conversation had to take place either in the laws of Shabbos candles or in the laws of Chanuka candles. Those are the only two choices. So for whatever reason, the Rambam chose to discuss it in the laws of Chanuka candles. Now we know what that reason is, because he wants to illustrate to us that the law of Chanuka candles is to bring peace into the world, and that peace is taken care of in this scenario by lighting the Shabbos candles. We still had another question. The other question is that while he's about it, the Rambam also compares, well, what would you do if you had the same financial constraints and you could not afford both Shabbos candles and Kiddush wine? Which one takes precedence? And he says Shabbos candles. Now, why is that part of the conversation of Chanuka? Surely he should have split it. Surely that conversation definitely should have taken place in the laws of Shabbos. Obviously, because it's a law related to Shabbos. Why does the Rambam clump the two together? The balance of Shabbos candles versus Chanuka candles and the balance of Shabbos candles versus Kiddush wine in the same conversation. So let's see. Der mit is euch move on. Was der Rambam hat die zwei Inyonim. As ner beisoi hat adin kdime legabe ner Chanuka und legabe Kiddush hayoim. Koilel gewinnt zusammen und nicht in besonderer Fallen wie in Gemara. Now we can address this question and answer and explain how come it is that the Rambam takes the laws of Shabbos candles versus Kiddush and the laws of Shabbos candles versus Chanuka candles and puts them into a single conversation, unlike his original source, the Gemara, that spoke about them in two separate conversations. Why? Why does he do this? Says the Rebbe lahadgish, because what the Rambam wants to emphasize for us is he wants to illustrate the point, exactly the point, that it's not two separate instructions. As ner beisai is aleph deiche ner Chanuka und beis deiche Kiddush hayoim. See, look, this is how it would work. If I've got two options, right? I've got a discussion around the laws of Chanuka and I've got a discussion around the laws of Kiddush. And I put the one discussion into one paragraph, book, chapter, and the other into a different paragraph, book, or chapter. Then obviously that implies, well, the reason Shabbos candles take precedence over Chanuka candles is one reason. And the reason they take precedence over Kiddush wine must be a different reason. Because look, we're discussing it separately. Must be related to something else. The fact that the Rambam puts them both into a single paragraph, into a single halacha, is because he wants us to understand that there's a single reason why in both cases Shabbos candles take precedence. No, das ist ein und derselbe Din. It's the same law, it's the same thinking, it's the same approach. What's the approach? The approach is vibal da sholem is klolos kavonas nesinas haTorah v'chol mitzveiseha kol haTorah. Because as we know, and as we've discussed, the whole purpose of the whole of Judaism, including every single mitzvah within Judaism, is to create peace in the world. Then naturally, koilel oich ner Chanuka v'kiddush hayoim. Naturally, Chanuka candles are why? To bring peace to the world. Kiddush wine is why? To bring peace to the world. Is that tzad hashave shebohen mechayev dikidima for ner beisai. The common denominator between these two mitzvahs, and for that matter, any mitzvah, the common denominator being, why do we do these mitzvahs? To increase shalom, peace in the world. That's the same reason why Shabbos candles should take precedence over both of them. Because Shabbos candles, as we've already illustrated, is designed in an open, clear way to bring peace to the world. So what have we done so far? We started off our conversation with a string of questions. We felt initially that the Rambam had done a bit of an overkill when he was trying to prove why Shabbos candles take precedence over Chanuka candles, with all of these proofs and these sweeping statements about how important peace is. Now we understand exactly what the Rambam wanted to do. The Rambam wanted to illustrate to us a principle that applies across the board to the whole of Judaism. The principle being, anytime there is a mitzvah that has the primary theme of peace, that mitzvah will always rise to the top, because every mitzvah's theme is peace. You just don't always see it. So when I've got a mitzvah that speaks that theme to the public, that mitzvah will definitely take precedence over anything else that happens to be within range or in conflict. So be it Kiddush wine or be it a Chanuka menorah, the result is going to be the same. If it's up against Shabbos candles, which announce the theme of peace, Shabbos candle will take precedence. Okay. Now that we've done that, we still have something to think about. Because, wow, what a beautiful principle he's taught us. He's taught us a principle that Judaism is about shalom. Judaism is about bringing peace. And that there are certain mitzvahs that illustrate that a little bit more clearly than other mitzvahs. Brilliant. So why was Chanuka chosen as the environment in which we would get to learn this particular lesson? There possibly could have been other places, surely in halacha, or in other discussions outside of the halachic framework, that possibly could have illustrated this principle to us, that the most important thing in Judaism is peace. Why does it land up happening in Chanuka? Dafka. What do we know? What are we going to learn? What are we going to discover about Chanuka by digging deeply into this particular discussion around peace? And incidentally, along the way of this discussion, effectively what we're going to do is we're going to discover that the nature and structure of Shabbos and the nature of structure of Chanuka are ironically actually quite opposite to each other. Even though both of them are celebrated with candles, you're going to find that there's a certain aspect about them. Yes, of course, they carry the primary theme that runs through everything, the theme of peace, but you're going to find out that there's something about them that's not exactly aligned, and that's where our insight is going to come from. So Chanuka, for some reason, is going to be more associated with shalom, with the theme of peace, than possibly other areas of Torah. So that's Ois Vav. That's where we're really going to get stuck in today. So have a look at Ois Vav. It's right at the bottom of the second column. V'yesh lahamtik the Sichos from Midas HaShalom from Kol HaTorah to Hilches Chanuka. Let's find a beautiful, he says lahamtik, which means basically to make it sweet. In other words, to make it geschmack, to make it really, like, let's really appreciate how come it is that out of all the various mitzvahs, out of all the various things that Jewish people do, how come Chanuka becomes the one that illustrates this theme of peace in such a stark way? So what we're going to learn is Val Chanuka is nit nor a prat in Kol HaTorah was nit nelasi shalom ba'olam, nor Chanuka is shaykh to Kol HaTorah. So the first hint that we need to discover is that Chanuka is not like most other mitzvahs. Most mitzvahs talk to a very specific area of Judaism. Let's say, for argument's sake, a mezuzah on your door. So what's the theme of a mezuzah? You can tell me that, yes, there's the overriding theme that every single mitzvah is to bring shalom, to bring peace to the world. Fine, beautiful. That's absolutely true. But when I look at a mezuzah, what do I specifically think about? I think about the fact that the mezuzah is the symbol of Hashem's protection for us. If, for argument's sake, let's just say that there was something, there isn't, but let's just say that there was something that could override the mezuzah. So let's just say, like Korach's argument, which was proven false. But let's just for a moment take his argument, where Korach felt that if you've got 3 Torah scrolls in a room, you don't need a mezuzah on the door, because obviously the mezuzah is just 1 or 2 paragraphs out of the Torah, and the Torah scroll is the whole thing. So let's just assume for a second that that was true, and we didn't put a mezuzah on a particular door. And by the way, there is a halacha that says that if you've got a place that is a shul, that is dedicated solely for davening, not a base medrash that's dedicated for learning, technically it does not have to have a mezuzah on the door. Not for that reason, though. Not because it's overridden by another mitzvah. It just doesn't qualify as a so-called place of residence. So let's say that Korach was right. And let's say that a room full of Torah scrolls did not require a mezuzah. Okay, so you'd say, okay, mezuzah, one detail of Judaism is temporarily suspended in this environment. It doesn't have a comment on the whole of Judaism. Here's another example, okay? An example we can all relate to. Keeping kosher. It's a requirement of the Torah that a Jewish person eats only kosher. That's it, non-negotiable. Only eat kosher. There's nothing to discuss, right? Would you agree under all circumstances a person has to eat kosher? No. There is a mitzvah to preserve life. God forbid, if a person is in a situation where it's a life or death decision and the only thing to keep them alive is not kosher. So let's say the person's on a desert island and the only thing to eat would require something that's not, the only animals around are not kosher, right? Or whatever. Let's say that a person needs a particular kind of medication and that medication has an active ingredient that is fundamental to that medication that is not kosher. So what would we say? We'd say, of course, the mitzvah of preservation of life overrides the mitzvah of kosher. We temporarily suspend that person's requirement to eat kosher. Fine. So we've temporarily put kosher aside. Would anybody say that that represents the whole of Judaism being suspended at the moment because we need to preserve a person's life? No, there are a whole lot of other mitzvahs that that person can do exactly at the same time. So perhaps they need this food in order to survive, but it might happen to be on a Shabbos. They're still keeping Shabbos. They're still wearing a pair of tzitzis or whatever else that they're doing. So it's unique if you could find a particular mitzvah that when it is suspended, you actually think, hey, hang on, that's quite something, because this mitzvah represents not a facet of Judaism, but actually represents the whole of Judaism. What we're going to see is that Chanuka represents the whole of Judaism. It's not an individualized mitzvah like kosher or a mezuzah or a pair of tzitzis or tefillin or whatever. How is it that Chanuka represents the whole of Judaism? Well, it's quite obvious if you know the history. The Rambam is Meirich and Onoib von Hilches Chanuka wegen der Sibbe von Kviasimei Chanuka. You know what's interesting? It's interesting that the Rambam wrote 14 volumes of Jewish law, the Mishnah Torah, the first encyclopedia of halacha. And that's what it is. It's a book of Jewish law. That means any detail that he includes in the Mishnah Torah has to be of an halachic nature. It's not a book of philosophy, it's not a book of mysticism, and it's not a book of history. So any time that anything is discussed in the Mishnah Torah, you immediately need to know it is of halachic impact. So how does the Rambam introduce the laws of Chanuka? It's fascinating. He starts off by saying, B'bayis Sheni, during the period of the Second Temple, K'shemolchu Yavon, when the Hellenist Greek-Assyrian Empire was, Greek-Syrian, not Assyrian, Greek-Syrian Empire was the power in the region, Gozru Gzeiros al Yisrael. They enacted decrees against the Jewish people. Ubitlu Dosam. And the nature of those decrees was that they wanted to cancel Judaism. They did not want us to practice Judaism. And they did not allow the Jewish people to engage in Torah study and the fulfillment of mitzvahs. Now, if you want to nuance it a little bit more, there were certain mitzvahs that they did allow, and there was certain study that they did allow, but by and large, they outlawed the study of Torah and the performance of mitzvahs. And that continued, this persisted for a period of time, until eventually Hashem showed great mercy, and he allowed us to rise up against them, and he saved us from them. Okay, we know the story, obviously, the story of the Hashmonoi family, probably better known as the Maccabees, and how they rose up against the Hellenists, and they managed to vanquish them and to reclaim the Beis HaMikdash and to reinstate practice of Judaism. You hear this? Here is the halachic impact. The Rambam is not just telling us a story, just in case you didn't know the history of Chanuka. Let me just tell you what happened. You know, when it comes to the laws of the Pesach Seder, he doesn't tell us. Let me quickly tell you the history of the Exodus from Egypt, in case you don't know, so that you know why we celebrate Pesach. Or when he talks about sitting in a sukkah, he doesn't tell us, you know, there was a history of the Jews in the desert. He very, very briefly tells us that the Torah refers to the fact that Hashem protected us in the desert, and therefore we have to have sukkahs. Yeah, as the Rebbe points out, the Rambam is marich. That means he goes into quite a bit of detail, unusual uncharacteristic detail to tell us the whole story of exactly what happened, what the threat was, and how it was resolved, and so on and so forth. And then he says, Umipnei zeh. He has the halachic part. Umipnei zeh, and it's for this reason, because there was this threat against the entire Judaism, and then that threat was neutralized. Therefore, the sages of that period of time introduced a mitzvah, that these 8 days that you and I call Chanuka, they should be days that are dedicated to celebration and to gratitude to Hashem. This is information of an halachic nature. You want to understand what Chanuka is, you need to know the story. Because the story tells you Chanuka is not a detail within Judaism. It is a story of a threat against everything Jewish. Our entire faith system, our entire religious community was under threat, and it was saved. So Chanuka represents saving or preserving everything Jewish. Das heißt, says the Rebbe, that means, as Teuchen in Yonu von Chanuka besteht, nicht nur in dem, was sie kommt durch am Uram Mesuyam und hat Mitzvahs Protios, wie Shara Yomim Tovim va Mitzvahs shemid Rabbanan Adam min HaTorah. What's the Rambam trying to illustrate to us? Chanuka is not a specific festival to celebrate a specific event that was very important in Jewish history. Why do we have a holiday of Pesach? Because there was a specific event that happened. The specific event was the Jewish nation was slaves, and Hashem took us out of Egypt. And by the way, only after that do we get the Torah. So you can't really say that at that point in time there was a threat against all of Judaism, because Judaism didn't exist yet. Why do we celebrate the holiday of Shavuos? Because of a specific event that happened. Hashem gave us the Torah. And obviously, from that point on, we became the Jewish people. We were identified by the Torah, and our entire lifestyle is mandated by the Torah. Absolutely, but it's a specific event. Why do you have a mezuzah on your door? Because it represents a specific concept, the idea of Hashem protecting us. Why do we have Shabbos? Because there was a specific event. Hashem created the world, and he rested on the seventh day. And to commemorate that specific event, we rest on the seventh day. Chanuka is different. Chanuka means that there was a time that Judaism almost disappeared. If they would have had their way, the Yevonim, the Hellenists, if they would have had their way, would have been the end of Judaism. And the fact that there was a small band of people who stood up with tremendous miracle from Hashem's part to help them, and they pushed back, that's why we have Judaism today. So Chanuka, and this is key information for our conversation, Chanuka celebrates the whole of Judaism. I knew somebody was going to say that. I knew somebody was going to say, what about Purim? It's the same thing with Purim. It's not really, because there's a very important distinction between Purim and Chanuka. And of course, each one is incredibly important in its own right. The Battle of Purim was a battle over the physical Jewish nation. Haman wanted to kill the people. The Battle of Chanuka was a battle over the soul of the nation. The Yevonim were not interested in killing the people. In fact, if you go and look at the Rambam over there, because it's quite lengthy, he goes into quite a bit of detail. So he says that initially it was a decree against practice, and then when the Jews refused to conform, then they actually started to crack down physically on the Jewish people. But the primary goal of the Yevonim was to eradicate Judaism, as opposed to the primary goal of Haman, that was to eradicate Jews. Now, of course, it's a massive thing for us, the fact that Hashem saved us from Haman, and that not a hair on anybody's hair was harmed by Haman. That's a huge thing. But you wouldn't be able to say that, therefore, the holiday of Purim represents everything that Torah is about, because the threat was not against what Torah is about. You could say that Purim is the celebration of everything that Jews are about. That you could say, because Haman had an issue with Jews. Remember, what does he say? All of his decrees were against the Yehudim. And the word Yehudim is a very unique word, because we're told that a Yehudi is somebody who acknowledges Hashem and rejects idolatry. Remember that Haman walked around with this little mini idol hanging around his neck, and he wanted people to bow either to himself as a deity, or at the very least to the idol that was hanging around his neck. So to be Yehudi is who it is as a Jewish, what it means to be a Jewish person. A Jewish person is somebody who rejects polytheism. He rejects idolatry. So yes, you could say that Purim is the holiday that celebrates what a Jew is. Chanuka is the holiday that celebrates what Judaism is. And that's what we're looking for in our conversation over here. We're looking for something that speaks to the heart of what the whole of Judaism is, because that's what we're saying. The whole of Judaism is shalom. And if there was a period in history where there were individuals who were trying to stamp out Judaism, effectively what they were trying to stamp out is the principle of shalom. So back inside the Sicha, noch mehr, bei Chanukah hat sich aufgetan die Yeshua von Gzeros Klolius, von ganzen das Yisrael und Klolus Esek HaTorah v'HaMitzvahs. It's a critical information for us to understand that Chanukah celebrates the rescue of the Jewish faith, the rescue of the practice of Torah, the rescue of the authenticity of Jewish practice. Because you do remember that they were slick and sly, the Yevonim. They were slick people. They were slick because what they thought was, we're not gonna come out guns blazing and say you can't be Jewish. They said you can be Jewish, just not in a Jewish way. It's like the classic liberal voice that says we allow everybody freedom of speech as long as you speak the way we want you to speak. That's basically what they were saying at that point in time. You can be as Jewish as you want, as long as you don't do certain core things. For example, and this is something that's explained elsewhere in Chassidus in a lot of detail, but for example, they had big issues with the idea that the Jewish nation would be committed to things that didn't have a rational basis. So the Yevonim were very much into the human mind and philosophy and science, and they celebrated the rational mind. So the idea that we had, as we say in Al-Anisim, we say that they wanted to get rid of chukei retzonecha, the chukim, the irrational element of Judaism. That's what they wanted to eradicate. So in other words, they wanted to eradicate the soul of Judaism, keep the body, do the things of Judaism, but suck out of it the soul of what Judaism is all about. And that's exactly the chap of Chanuka. Chanuka was the battle for the essence of Judaism, the battle for the soul of Judaism. And incidentally, by the way, that's why it is associated with oil, because in various places in Torah, the oil, specifically olive oil, is a symbol of the essence of something. So you take the olive and you squeeze out, what do you get? What do you get out of the essence of the olive? You get the oil of the olive. So it represents the essence, the core of what it's all about. And that's what the Yevonim, keep using that word because I don't want to say Greek, because they were not necessarily ethnically Greek. And it's a little confusing for people when we say that they're Syrian, because they were Seleucids, which are Hellenized Syrians. So it's easier just to say Yevonim because that's the original name. So what did the Yevonim want to do? They wanted to eradicate Judaism. Therefore, what is Chanuka? Chanuka is the celebration of everything that Judaism, everything that Torah represents. Okay, so now that we know that, it starts to make sense that if we're going to speak about the value of peace and how the value of peace is the value of Judaism, it makes sense that we should talk about it in the context of Chanuka. Why? Because Chanuka is a holiday that celebrates retaining the authentic value of Judaism. See how it's all starting to come together now? So we thought originally that if I've got this boxing match between Shabbos candles and Chanuka candles, I have to choose one of them. So I'm going to choose I'm going to choose Shabbos candles. Some of you said right at the beginning because it's more frequent and more common and therefore takes precedence. And we thought perhaps there's some kind of element of Shabbos candles that is more important than Chanuka candles. Actually, it turns out that when it is Chanuka, the time that we celebrate regaining and retaining the authenticity of Judaism, what is the authenticity of Judaism? Laso shalom ba'olam, to bring peace to the world. Well, that's a brilliant time for Chanuka to step back and allow Shabbos to speak its message. Because what is the message of Shabbos candles? The theme of the whole of Judaism. What is the message of Chanuka? Preserving the theme of the whole of Judaism. Perfect place to illustrate exactly this point. That sometimes you shrink back in order to allow the peace of Judaism to sustain. And that's exactly what Yiddishkeit is all about. Chanuka is the perfect time to illustrate it. With that in mind, as I said, we're going to have a look at the comparison between Shabbos and Chanuka in, so to speak, their halachic constructs. And we're going to learn something really, really interesting about how the two of them operate and why it is that they come together in this particular showdown and how that illustrates the purpose of the whole of Torah. that puts us at Zion. Zion, the second last paragraph in the first column. Al pihan now is the Sichos von dem Din ner beisoi koiden zilches Chanuka nor mitzad the Sichos von malis hashalom to kol haTorah. So now we basically explained at this point in time that the reason the conversation comes up specifically in the laws of Chanuka is because we want to illustrate and highlight the importance of peace, which is the primary theme of Torah. Says no was Chanuka is a tale from kol haTorah kenal, and now we've explained that it dafka fits in the laws of Chanuka because Chanuka illustrates the whole of Torah, the whole of Judaism, the whole purpose of everything. So it all dovetails really closely and nicely together. But we're not done. The bald ober as the Rambam is meirich wegen inen hasholem in Hilches Chanuka dafka is mistaver loimar as inen hasholem hat a shayches miyuchedes zum teuchen v'inyan fun Chanuka. So far, the way that we've explained it is we've said almost like a little bit of a formula, like an if-then formula. If Chanuka is all about preserving Judaism when those people wanted to destroy it, and the whole theme of Judaism is peace, then Chanuka must obviously be an illustration of peace. So if you've got a situation that you could use to illustrate that theme of peace, like when you're going to allow the Shabbos candles precedence, great, it all fits like a perfect puzzle. Chanuka preserves Judaism. Judaism is about peace. Here's how we illustrate it in this particular case. The Rebbe says there's got to be more to it than that. It's got to be that the theme of peace is somehow integral to the theme of Chanuka. In other words, besides the fact that Chanuka represents all of Judaism, and all of Judaism is about peace, it's got to be a little bit more, that the theme of Chanuka is the theme of peace. And to understand that, what we're going to do is we're going to effectively divide the whole of Jewish practice into two groups, two columns, two categories. Once we do that, we're going to say Chanuka belongs to the one category and Shabbos belongs to the other category, and that's going to help us to understand why Dafka Chanuka carries the theme of peace in a very overt way. So wenn man das verstehen behaken, was man gefindt, we'll explain this by first looking at something which we pretty much all know, as die Avodah und Uftuf von Torah Mitzvahs drückt sich aus in zwei Gdorim Klolien. And pretty much you could say that the whole of Judaism can be split into two general areas. Aleph, Anoichi Havai Elekecha Goimer Asei Apa'ula von Chiyuv. Beis lo yelechoy lekim achem lo yisesei apa'ula fun shlila. We all know that at the time the Torah was given at Mount Sinai, we know that Hashem dafka said the first two of the 10 commandments himself. And it was a very overwhelming experience. The Jewish people actually couldn't tolerate that exposure. We know that their neshamas left their bodies. We know that their bodies were flung back a distance of 12 kilometers. We know that Hashem had to send down teams of paramedic angels to put the Jews back together again. And eventually, after the second of the two announcements was made by Hashem, the people turned to Moshe, not that Moshe was with them, he was on the mountain, they say, Moshe, you talk to us, we can't handle this. And from there on, the rest of the 10 commandments are shared by Moshe himself. So you have to ask yourself a question, why did Hashem do that? I mean, ultimately, he knew exactly what was going to happen. It wasn't a surprise. It wasn't like, oops, I think I turned up the volume too high. You know, Hashem understood exactly what was going to happen, and nevertheless, he chose Dafka to say the first two commandments himself. Why is that? The reason that's given is because those two commandments effectively incorporate the whole of Judaism within them. And what we needed at Mount Sinai was to get the whole of Judaism directly from the source. Of course, Moshe was going to unpack it, but the original seeds of which everything would be unpacked, they had to come from Hashem directly. So what are the two seeds? Anoichi Hashem Elokecha, I am Hashem your God, and Lo Yelecha Elokim Acherim, you should have no other gods before me. And basically what that tells us is that there are two modes of how we connect to Hashem through Judaism. The one mode is we connect to Hashem through the things that we do proactively. They're called the mitzvahs aseh, the positive commandments, or as we call it, kum va'aseh, things that you have to get up and proactively do. And if you don't get up and proactively do them, you get zero value. Let's say, for argument's sake, there's a mitzvah every single day to daven to Hashem. If you don't get up and daven to Hashem, you don't get points for trying, for having been in a good mood. You didn't do it. You don't get it. It's zero value. Kum v'aseh, practical things that a person actually has to proactively do. They are all encapsulated in Anoichi Hashem Elokecha. I am Hashem your God. So when Hashem made that announcement, I am Hashem your God, he effectively shared with us the core of every single positive mitzvah, from giving tzedakah, to eating matzah on Pesach, to putting on tefillin, to loving your fellow Jew. There's another mode of connection that we have to Hashem, and that is how we build a relationship with Hashem by avoiding things that he wants us not to do. That's called mitzvahs lo yisesei. Now there, it's not kum, it's not proactive. You can actually be quite passive and still fulfill the mitzvah. So let's say, for argument's sake, of course, a lot of people say, you know how many mitzvahs I did today? I didn't murder anybody today. Big deal. If you didn't feel like murdering anybody, it's not a mitzvah. You have to, at the very least, have had some kind of a temptation. You can't rack up mitzvahs for things that are completely outside of your paradigm, but they happen to be illegal according to Torah. So you say, whoa, look what a tzaddik I am. I haven't done these things. But let's say, for argument's sake, that a person has the urge to share a juicy piece of lashon hara. So how do you stop yourself? Passively. You just don't say it. Or a person who once upon a time used to love a particular restaurant, but now they keep kosher, and they happen to walk through the shopping mall past that particular restaurant where they happen to smell the aroma of what used to once upon a time be their absolute favorite dish. And they get that feeling in their stomach, oh, I wish I could have it, but you just simply don't walk in. It's that simple. You're not at the point where it's like this internal battle, do I, don't I, whatever. You have the temptation, you say no, and that's it. You have now fulfilled a mitzvah lo yisaseh, a negative mitzvah. So all of the negative mitzvahs were all encapsulated in the phrase, lo yeh l'choi lekim achim, you should have no other gods. Why? Think about it. Every time I proactively do something that Hashem wants, I'm basically testifying to the fact that Hashem exists. Why else would I do these things if I didn't believe in him? Right? Why else would I wind those straps around my arm if it wasn't a statement of Anoichi Hashem Elokecha, that Hashem is God and I actually believe in it? Why else would I not eat something that I feel tempted to eat, if not to reject the fact there are no other alternatives? No other gods means there's no other alternatives. There's no other force. There's no other options. There's nothing I can do outside of what Hashem wants. So that's pretty much the division of Judaism. There's the part of Judaism that we do as a proactive series of steps that we take to acknowledge Hashem in the world. And there's the part of Judaism that is comprised of a whole lot of things that we avoid in order not to deny Hashem's authority in the world. So Bechlolus is das der Chiluk zwischen mitzvahs aseh and mitzvahs lo yiseseh. So pretty much you can now split the whole of Judaism into two categories: 248 positive mitzvahs, which are all about embellishing my relationship with Hashem, strengthening my relationship with Hashem on the one hand, and on the other hand, I have the mitzvahs lo yiseseh, which are all the things that I'm supposed to avoid so that I don't land up ruining my relationship with Hashem. Now comes the fascinating part. Fascinating. Everything that we've discussed up until this point is effectively all Torah laws. So the Torah mandates 248 positive commandments and 365 negative commandments. But in addition to that, we have 7 rabbinic mitzvahs. Now you have to ask yourself, what is the nature of these rabbinic mitzvahs? Are they technically in the category of positive commandments, or are they technically in the realm of negative commandments? It's so interesting. So let's see what he says. Zayin mitzvahs de Rabbanan aber, the 7 mitzvahs that were mandated by the Rabbanan, that basically the mitzvahs from the time of King Solomon. It was the first of those mitzvahs. So the time of King Solomon right through to the period of Chanuka. V'zainen kulon bekum va'asei dafka. All of the 7 enactments of the Rabbanan, the 7 rabbinic mitzvahs, are all proactive mitzvahs, things that you need to do. You need to wash your hands before you eat bread. Right? That's an example. You need to celebrate the holiday of Purim. You need to celebrate the 8 days of Chanuka. So every one of them is designed in a positive sense. So you would imagine that they belong under the category of positive mitzvahs. But Chassidus explains, is sibosam echavanosan dechias shlilas hora ve'aklet barucha b'mokim acher. It's explained in other places in Chassidus that even though the nature and design of each one of these 7 mitzvahs is in a proactive, positive construct, actually every single one of them is designed to remove negativity from the world. And this is really fascinating. So let's go back for a second and understand the nature of these 2 streams of mitzvahs. What happens when, for example, a person fulfills a positive commandment? So let's say that the positive commandment is you've just built a new house and you're putting the mezuzah on the door. So as you put the mezuzah on the door, what are you doing in the world? You're bringing more of Hashem's light and energy into your space. That's what a positive mitzvah does. It brings positive energy and a little bit more awareness of Hashem into our world. What happens when a person does something that is against what Hashem wants? God forbid, let's say for argument's sake, that a person breaks Shabbos, a person eats non-kosher, a person injures somebody else intentionally. So these are things that are not allowed. What does the person do? They bring more negative energy into the world, right? They bring something into the world that darkens the world. So effectively, it does exactly the opposite of what a positive mitzvah does. So now, if a person avoids a negative mitzvah, let's say that a person is tempted to do something which is against the Torah, where it be anything from speaking Lashon Hora to eating a cheeseburger to slapping someone across the face, whatever it might be, and the person does not do it, do they bring more light into the world? No. What do? They push negativity out of the world. In other words, that temptation that the person feels to do something wrong means that that negative energy is already in the world. And the fact that I stand up to it and that I refuse to fall for the particular temptation means that I now neutralize that energy and I kind of push it out of the world. So those are the 2 streams. There's the stream of increasing the degree of divine revelation in our world through positive mitzvahs, and there is the stream of removing impediment to divine revelation, removing negative energy from the world, cleansing the world, which is achieved by not performing negative mitzvahs. When it comes to the rabbinic mitzvahs, you see that there's an interesting hybrid, because the way you do a rabbinic mitzvah is proactive. You celebrate Purim. You celebrate Chanuka. You wash your hands. But the interesting thing is, by doing that positive mitzvah, effectively every one of the mitzvahs d'Rabbanan was designed to expunge the world of some kind of negativity. So let's say, for example, a person is going to wash their hands before they eat, right? So what's the idea? There's some kind of an impurity. There's some kind of negativity that exists in the world. And we want to ensure that that negativity is not transferred to the food that you're about to eat. So washing hands, even though it's a proactive step, is designed to flush out negative energy from the world. It's a very, very fascinating concept. Only rabbinic laws do this. Only the mitzvahs d'Rabbanan create positive, proactive actions that have the result of pushing away negative energy. Think of Chanuka as an example too. So why do we celebrate Chanuka? We celebrate Chanuka because there was a negative energy that came into the world at a particular time in our history. And yes, of course, it is historic. So it happened then. But at the same time, like everything else that's part of our history, it has some kind of residue that still lives now. So what was the issue that happened at the time of Chanuka? The issue was that there were a group of people who were prominent individuals, successful individuals, most importantly for our conversation, smart individuals, really intellectually overbearing. And they came with their sophistication and they said, you know what? Judaism is archaic. Judaism is outdated. Your blind faith in the divine system that you believe in has passed its sell-by date. Time to upgrade. Time to have a Judaism that is more palatable to the modern world. Now, you tell me, Maybe there are no Hellenist Greeks today, but is that thinking totally gone? No, you still hear about it today. People consistently say it's time for Judaism to move with the times. It's time for Judaism to relax certain of its outdated policies about certain lifestyles or certain behaviors. It's time for Judaism to adapt to a modern world of technology, and therefore you should be allowed to do different things in the Shabbos environment and so on and so forth. So it's still here. The same potential negative energy still exists in our world. How do we push it out? Once a year, we get up on Chanuka and we take our menorah, and ideally we use olive oil because that represents the purity of Judaism. And we light that menorah to say, you know what? This is a time of the year where there's a lot of fancy stuff going on. There's going to be fireworks, there's going to be big trees and colorful lights and people giving presents, and it's very exciting. And some people will say maybe it's time for Judaism to catch up with the times and to also adopt some of that secular world of how you celebrate and what life is all about. Let your hair down a little bit. We take our little lamps and we say that little purity of light dispels a lot of darkness, because that's how rabbinic laws work. We do something proactive, not for the purpose of illuminating the world with divine light, but rather with the purpose of pushing out some of the negativity and the darkness in the world. Now that we understand that that's the nature of a rabbinic mitzvah, and we understand that Chanuka falls into that category, we can then do a comparison between the nature of Shabbos as a structure of law and the nature of Chanuka as a structure of law. And based on that, we'll come to a deeper understanding of why Dafka Chanuka illustrates the purpose and the meaning of Judaism, as in the peace that Judaism is supposed to represent. So that, Imit Hashem, we'll pick up next week. I don't know if anybody